I built that workshop with my own 2 hands, plate by plate, over 9 years on a leased dome floor that nobody else wanted. Everybody told me Dome 7 was a dead address, too far from the transit spine, too close to the ice mining tunnels, air recyclers older than the colony charter itself. I didn't care. I bought the lease when it was cheap and ugly, and I made it mine. By the time the buyout notice came nailed to my door, my workshop had repaired half the independent haulers on that moon, and I had calluses to prove every inch of it. The notice came from the Lunar Settlement Trust, 3 lines of cold administrative language demanding I surrender the lease for consolidation purposes. Signature required within the cycle. I read it twice, set it on my workbench under a fuel coupling I was rethreading, and went back to work. Other shop owners on the lower levels had already folded. Hask, who ran the parts depot 2 corridors down, signed inside a day and was gone before his sign came down. Petra, who'd run the air filter exchange since before I leased my own floor, lasted a week longer and left without saying goodbye, just an empty bay and a half-swept floor. I figured I'd hold out as long as the air held. I'd outlasted 2 recycler failures, 1 dome seal scare that had half the level evacuated for 3 days, and a market crash that took every other independent shop on the spine with it. A piece of paper from a trust office I'd never once seen in person wasn't going to be the thing that finally moved me. I found her 4 nights later, wedged behind a crate of cold fusion coils I'd been meaning to inventory for a month. She didn't make a sound when I pulled the crate back, just looked at me with eyes set wider than a human's, lower lids thick and silvered to cut vacuum glare. Kesani, by the look of her, though I'd only ever seen their kind in transit hub crowds, never this close. Small, gray-blue skin gone ashen at the edges from cold and hunger. She had 1 hand pressed flat against the coil casing like she was bracing to run, and nowhere left to run to. I didn't reach for her. I crouched down to the floor instead, put myself below her eye line, and I held still a long time before I said anything at all. "Nobody's going to hurt you in here," I told her. "This is my shop. Nobody comes in unless I let them." She didn't answer. Later I'd learned the Kesani don't speak until they trust the room, and trust, for that kind, takes weeks, not minutes. But she didn't run either. That was enough for 1 night. I learned what I could piece together over the following days, mostly from a cargo manifest I shouldn't have read, and a half-burned ration tag still clipped to her sleeve. There'd been a raid on the lower processing levels, trust enforcers clearing out an unregistered worker dormitory the syndicate didn't want on record, families and children alike loaded onto a transport that left without a full headcount. She'd slipped the line. However she did it, she'd ended up 3 corridors over, in the 1 shop on that level too stubborn to have sold out yet. I didn't report her. I want to be plain about that, because there were people who would have called it the safe thing to do, the smart thing. I have never once believed safe and right line up as neatly as people like to pretend. I named her nothing for the first week. Didn't feel like mine to give. She started following the sound of the forge instead, stood close to the heat shielding while I worked, watching my hands the way you'd watch weather coming. The first time I lit the main burner with her in the room, she flinched at the flare and then stood her ground, refusing to look away from it, like she was deciding whether to trust a thing that hot. By the second week she was handing me tools before I asked for them. Wrong ones mostly, a torque driver when I needed a clamp, a coil of binding wire when I needed solder. But she was learning the shapes, learning which drawer held what, learning the particular weight of a thing in her small hands before she learned its name. I started calling her 6, after the bay number she'd hidden in, until one evening she pointed at herself and made a sound low in her throat that I never could repeat right, but that I took, ever after, as her name. She slept on a folded tarp behind the parts shelf for the first month, close enough to the forge to feel its warmth through the night, and it was 3 weeks before she'd let that distance close to an arm's length when I was working. The trust didn't forget about me. 3 more notices came, each one sharper than the last, and on the 19th day an enforcer walked into my shop in person, A broad man named Calder Voss, trust badge bright on a coat that had never once seen vacuum work, the kind of man who measured a room by what it was worth to take. He looked at my forge, my tool walls, the crates stacked floor to ceiling, and he smiled like he already owned it. "You're the last holdout on this level," he said. "Sign the transfer, you walk away with relocation credit. Don't sign, and the trust exercises forced reclamation in 30 days. Either way, this floor belongs to the consolidation." I told him I'd built every panel in that room with my own hands, and I wasn't signing anything that handed it to men who'd never welded a seam in their lives. He laughed, not unkindly, the way a man laughs at something he's already decided doesn't matter. Then his eyes went past me, to the back corner where Six had gone still beside the forge. "That a dependent," he said, "or unregistered cargo from the lower level sweep." I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very hard, the way metal goes quiet right before it gives. "She's listed on my workshop registry," I said. "Dependent on leased premises, has been since the week I found her." That wasn't true yet. It would be true within the hour, because the moment Voss left my shop, I pulled up every scrap of paperwork the colony charter had ever required of a leaseholder, and I read every line of it, really read it, for the first time in 9 years, until I found the clause buried in subsection 9. Any leaseholder in continuous occupancy may register a dependent under their own name, and the trust cannot reclaim a lease with a registered dependent in residence without a full guardianship review, a process that takes, by charter law, no fewer than 200 days. I filed the registration before midnight. 6. Dependent, ward of the leaseholder, Dome 7, Bay 11. My name beside hers in a column that had never once held anything but inventory counts. Voss came back 2 days later, this time with a second enforcer and a tablet full of objections. He told me the registration was irregular, that a man with no blood tie and no prior guardianship credentials had no standing to claim a Kesani minor as a dependent, that the trust would contest it in review. "Contest it?" "Then," I said, 200 days by your own charter. You want my shop, you'll have to outlast the clock you wrote yourselves." He looked at me a long moment, weighing whether I was bluffing. I wasn't. I'd spent 9 years learning every plate and pipe of that workshop, and I'd spent 2 days learning every word the trust had ever written about who got to keep what. He left without my signature, and the consolidation crews never came back to my level. Turned out forcing one registered guardianship through review cost the trust more credits and more time than 3 other shops combined. And a man with nothing left to lose is a poor investment for anyone's quarterly numbers. The 200 days passed, then 400 more, because bureaucracies forget to close files they're tired of fighting. 6 grew the way children grow when nobody's measuring them against a clock anymore, taller, steadier, quieter in a way that wasn't fear anymore but simply who she was. She learned to weld a clean seam before she learned the word for it in my language. She kept the forge log in her own hand, careful Kesani script beside my rough notes, and some evenings I'd catch her standing exactly where I'd first found her wedged behind that crate, except now she stood there like it was simply a place she liked, not a place she'd hidden. I never did sign that transfer. The trust eventually moved their consolidation elsewhere, chasing easier floors, easier men. My workshop is still standing on Dome 7, same plates, same forge, 9 years of work plus all the years since. Some nights 6 asks me why I never gave the shop up when it would have been easier. I tell her the truth, which is that I built it with my own hands, and a man doesn't hand over the one thing he made just because someone bigger tells him to. She tells me that's not really the answer to her question. She's right. The real answer is simpler than that and harder to say out loud, so mostly I don't. I kept the shop because the shop was the only thing standing between her and a manifest that wanted to erase her. Some things you protect because they're yours. Some things become yours because you refused once to let them go.